Hello, everyone. We're so glad that you're here. My name's Lisa Rowe, and I have the privilege of serving as the CEO for Support After Abortion and to be moderating today's conversation with my colleague, Karin Barbito. As you're joining, if you can make sure that you stay on mute, you can certainly keep your video on. We're going to be sharing today about the intersection of abortion and addiction, and I am thrilled to be able to share this platform with Karin today because she has a personal story that really connects. And it's our hope that you leave here today realizing that this particular population is extremely vulnerable to reproductive experiences, abortion in particular. And so it's our hope that we can share our experience, strength, and hope with you today. Without further ado, Karin, I'd love for you to take over the conversation and just kind of share with us why this topic is so near and dear to your heart.
Lisa, it's such a great question. We've talked about it so many times in the past. Just to give you a brief history, I had an abortion when I was 18. I didn't think that I thought about it much after that. I wasn't really pro-life. I wasn't pro-choice. I was pro-me. It was a really selfish decision, at least for me it was. But my life turned sideways after that, and eventually I was married and my husband and I couldn't have kids. And it was in that moment that the reality of what I had done set in. And I couldn't cope. I could not cope with the knowledge that I had taken the life of the only child that I was ever going to have. And so I started to drink and I started to use drugs. That's the only way that I could cope. And in my journey of addiction, I was in rehab 9 times. And not once did anybody ever ask me about previous pregnancies. It's so important that we ask the question, at least for me, because then it was still years after that, 20 years after that I came to work for a pregnancy center and somebody finally asked me, and I was afforded the opportunity to go through healing from my abortion trauma. And I didn't even know that healing existed prior to that. So the other thing, Lisa, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and I'm going to turn it back over to you so that you can answer this question. It was in my very last rehab when somebody even said to me, Karin, do you think that maybe you struggle with codependency? Again, I didn't know what that was, but I did the workbook and it changed my life forever. So we don't come to the table just with an abortion experience or an addiction experience. We come to the table with a whole host of unhealthy behaviors and choices that we've made. And I'm not saying that any agency should be the be all do all, but you should know where to send somebody if they are struggling with something else.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I think we're really touching on is the presenting problem. Or the pain point, if you will. So many of us intersect people's lives in their most desperate times. And it's those issues that are on the very top of the surface that we're encountering. I can't pay my rent. I can't live in this relationship anymore. I'm being, violated. I have too many children and I don't know what to do with this next child, or whatever the circumstances are. We're facing that very surface level conversation. And very rarely do we get past that in the work that most of us are doing. Very rarely do we get to the depths and breadths of what's actually happening.
Again, I'm just pointing out all of the different traumas that I had in my life that I really do now believe connect the dots all the way back to my abortion. I met somebody that was using drugs and they gave me the opportunity to experiment with them. And I was so codependent. So we're adding that in as well. I was so codependent that I chose the drugs rather than getting rid of the guy. And I was addicted to crack cocaine for like 4 years. Changed my life forever.
Right. And Karin, maybe some of the folks that are watching this today look at Karin today, you see this beautiful woman who's very articulate, very wise, very educated. She's been able to use this pain to cultivate purpose. But what I've been invited into understanding is that Karin was a late bloomer, if you will. She didn't start connecting the dots to all of these things until much later in life. So the wisdom and experience that we hear from Karin today is not always what we're seeing on the front lines. In fact, it's very rarely that we have that much intuition to connect to when we're walking alongside of our clients. So if you will today, just join us in understanding that we're having hindsight so that we can serve you better as you look at the clients who aren't nearly where Karin is today. day. And one of the things we're pulling out of Karin's story is that the presenting problem might have been a domestic violence situation, might have been, low self-esteem, whatever those things were for Karin. When she entered these recovery programs, she was on the streets. The recovery programs are doing exactly what some of us are doing and meeting their clients right here and missing some of the layers underneath. And so, Karin, you talked about being in 9 recovery programs, the last one really touching on codependency, but what was the focus of those recovery programs so that we can kind of get an understanding of what the addiction population is really doing in their rehab?
Wow. I don't know that I have too much good to say about it, in all honesty. I'll be honest with you. I mean, it was an opportunity to get off the streets, to get hot meals a day. You would go to groups. I didn't take it seriously until the last one. And so you would hook up while you were in the rehab facility. Typically within a few weeks, you would start, making yourself beautiful and acceptable on the outside, but you were still rotten and ugly on the inside. Somebody really has to be ready to stay clean more than they want to use. And that didn't happen for me until I didn't look outside of myself for validation. And that was a process, right? So I would do this codependency thing. I get rid of the guy. In a halfway house, I went through. So can I just say how my thinking shifted? Is that what you're kind of getting at? Okay. Sure. So I was in all these recoveries. When I would come out, they taught me to go to meetings. They taught me about stinking thinking. They taught me about being brutally honest with myself. I just didn't practice those things until much later on. So my first rehab, I probably came out and got high immediately. And when I say rehab, it's a detox and like a 30-day inpatient rehab. The second time, maybe I stayed clean for 3 months afterwards. You do gain recovery each time you go into rehab. And the length of time that I would stay sober afterwards got longer every single time. Right. And so in my last rehab, I was in detox. It was even before I got to the codependency, but I was so desperate to stay clean because I knew if I continued to use, I was going to die or I was going to go to prison. I had already been in jail a couple of times and I was facing some tremendous prison time. And they wanted me to leave after 3 days. Insurance only covers 3 days of detox. And they had no place for me to go. They didn't have an inpatient for me to go to. So I said, I'm not leaving. Call the police. I'd rather go to jail. I'm not leaving until you can find me a place. And they started to work with me. I was desperate to stay there. And finally, somebody listening to me said, are you like having suicidal thoughts or you feel like you're depressed? And I said, yes. I didn't know that I necessarily agreed with that, but I wanted to stay. And so they held me over till Monday. By Monday, they had a bed for me in inpatient. When my time was up at inpatient, they didn't have a halfway house for me. And now I'm working on my codependency stuff and I'm getting rid of the guy. And let me just back up. Let me know if I'm talking too long, Lisa. Okay.
No, thank you for sharing your story.
Yeah, sure. So when I was in that rehab, that guy got in touch with me and you could never receive phone calls in an inpatient. I don't know how he did it, but he had been arrested, was in jail, and he wanted me to come and get him. And most of the inpatient was gone. They were on some kind of outing and I had been on the previous one, so I couldn't go on this one. And I'm running around trying to find a counselor. I'm bawling, my makeup running down my face because we always clean up the outside before we clean up the inside. And I found a guy in his office and I ran into his office and I said, put yourself between me and that door because I'm going to leave. And if I leave, I'm going to get high and I'm going to eventually die. And so he talked me off the ledge for like a half hour. And that's when I got rid of the guy. So now it's time for me to leave the 30-day inpatient and there's nowhere for me to go. I said, I'm not leaving. Call the police. I'd rather be in jail than go back out there. I have nowhere to go at this point in time. And so they held me over until they got me into a halfway house. And that's where my life really started to change. So
yeah, you've said a couple times, Karin, like we clean up the outside before we clean up the inside. And it reminds me, excuse me, of this very kind of simple way to describe addiction. And sometimes it's too simple for some folks, but bear with me. And we're not just talking about substance abuse. This is Karen's story, but addiction is anything that feels compulsive, that you can't get rid of by yourself, that you do daily, or it occupies space and mind and experience. But the way that I like to see addiction is it's a stress response. Addiction is often a stress response. And so if what Karin is saying is accurate across the population, that we clean up the outside, the outside before we clean up the inside, right? We're not doing the internal work to really relieve that stress so that we don't need the response, which would be addiction. And so, what we hope to really bring awareness to right now is that our clients who struggle with addiction, who have stress responses like addiction, are not coming to us with the presenting problem of abortion or reproductive experiences. They're coming, like Karin is talking about, they're coming to us with issues up here. And so it's up to us to use intuition, discernment, and compassion to decide when we're ready to start going inside. Some of us are satisfied when the outside begins to change. Karen's doing a great job articulating that. But I'm not wanting you to stay there anymore. I want you to make sure that when that opening comes, you know how to ask the next question so that interior world starts to get cleansed and those stress responses or relapses begin to be minimized because we're actually cleansing the interior part. And part of that, as we're speaking directly to abortion, is learning when to ask the question. And so, Karin, if we can go back to you. Here you were presenting the outside, right? You weren't ready for change. You were going to these groups. For all intents and purposes, the programming was trying to get you to stop using. When could have the program or those people that were working with you at least started to ask you about your pregnancy experiences, potential children that you may have had, reproductive experiences, et cetera?
I think an inpatient, when you're assigned a case manager. I mean, detox is when people are coming in and they're detoxing off of, the drug. My detox wasn't nearly as bad as some others. I mean, heroin's really difficult to come off of. Alcohol's really difficult to come off of. But I would say an inpatient, you got 30 days. And, Lisa, you made such a great point. People did not ask me the right questions. What I wanted to, and I was wickedly deceitful. Right? I didn't even know when I was lying to myself. And so if somebody could have asked me, those kind of open-ended questions about triggers, what's triggering you to pick up again? When you get some time clean, I'm not craving it anymore, right? It's mental. I'm not physically craving it anymore. It's a mental thing. So ask me some questions about my thinking. Asks me some questions about how honest I'm being with myself. How self-aware am I? Because I wasn't any of those things. I'll share one thing with you. I was in a halfway house. So I probably had maybe 6 months clean at that time. And when I was in that halfway house, I had no identity of my own growing up. I never developed that. And so I went in search of what kind of woman I wanted to be because I hated who I was at that time. And so in the process of doing that, I started to get honest with myself. And this is a conversation that I had. And I'm sharing this because those of you that serve clients that might be actively in addiction, maybe can relate to this and take this knowledge back with you to better able to be better able to discuss these kinds of things with your clients. So I was sitting in my room by myself and I'm thinking, I got to go to Walmart. Okay. What do you have to get from Walmart? Well, I need to get this, this, and this from Walmart. Okay. Well, if you go to Walmart, the closest way to go is right through the hood. Okay. Well, can you go a different direction? Yeah, I can take Goodman. It will add 15 minutes to my drive. What's that? What's the hazard? What's the fear of going down through the hood? Well, dang well somebody's going to recognize your car and they're going to jump out at you and you're going to cop and you're going to use drugs again. So do you really need to go to Walmart? No, I don't need to go to Walmart. And that's the conversation, I did not know how to do that in the beginning. That's the kind of stuff that I would have liked sooner rather than later. That's the kind of thinking that really helped me to unpack what is my motive.
Yeah.
for the things that I'm doing.
Mm.